Looks all right. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out on a Thursday. Thank you, Anthony. This past weekend, I found myself having what has by now become a pretty familiar conversation. Maybe it's a conversation you've had. I've been having it all summer. Really, I've been having it all year. I got together with some friends and family around a coffee table, and we're just talking about things, talking about the weather. My brother had just gotten back from vacation. There's a new baby in the family. And then inevitably, in these past 12 months, somebody brings up the election cycle. And you hear things like, can you believe what candidate A said? I can't believe that they could say such a thing. Can you believe that the voters are supporting candidate B? That's insane. I'm so frustrated. And I listen to these things and I nod along, and we all kind of vent our frustration, but we also kind of shrug it off like, well, but what are you going to do? I also bite my tongue, because I know that when I leave that conversation and I enter a different sphere, maybe I go to the bar, maybe I go to work, I'm going to get a different group of people who are going to have the exact same conversation, but they're going to be on the complete opposite side of the spectrum. Can you believe that candidate B said such and such a thing? Can you believe that the voting population is supporting candidate A as much as they are, right? I've had this conversation over and over and over again to the point where it kind of feels like deja vu. Except this past weekend, it bothered me. This past weekend it bothered me because we just had the debate. And in addition to saying things like, can you believe that candidate A said such and such, and can you believe that the voters are supporting candidate B? They also said, I can't believe how well candidate A did. Candidate A won that debate. Candidate A walloped candidate B. And I bite my tongue and I think, this is a problem. Because when I go to the other sphere, when I go to the bar, when I go to work, I'm going to hear another group of thoughtful, well-informed people who sat down and watched the same exact debate, and they're going to say, candidate B won that election. Candidate B walloped candidate A. This is tricky, because we can't both be right. But we all fashion ourselves attentive, thoughtful audiences, right? So, when I was invited to talk about the elections, I thought I could talk about a lot of things. There are a couple things that I'm not going to do. I'm not going to endorse any one candidate or any one party tonight. If you came here hoping that I would do that, I know hundreds, if not thousands of other places where you can go and see that speech, right? There's no shortage of people endorsing candidates or parties. So I'm not going to do that. I'm also not going to analyze the proposals and policies and positions at play in the debates, because people are doing that. Turn on the radio, turn on the TV, pick up a newspaper or a magazine, go on the internet, and you will find tens of thousands of people doing that. What I want to talk about is this nagging problem, this idea that we can all sit down and fashion ourselves thoughtful audiences, watch the exact same arguments, and come to different conclusions. In the morning after this past presidential debate, the polls said that 1/4 of Americans disagreed with 3/4 of Americans. That's hundreds of thousands of people who watched the exact same debate and came to a different conclusion. Now, we can disagree about things like values or policy decisions, but it seems problematic to me that we can say that winning is up for debate. This is because when we think of debate traditionally, we think of things like chess. If you've ever picked up a book on persuasion or argumentation, you're probably going to find this comparison, that debate is like a chess match. You have two players who are thinking through their moves strategically, who are planning ahead and making just the right move to checkmate their opponent and win the debate. In a mass media age, I don't think that's quite accurate anymore. I think we have different competitions in front of mass media audiences. So I start thinking about football, right? For the sake of argument, imagine that most of us in this room are Packer fans, right? Even if you are the world's biggest Packer fan, you always support the Packers. You always want to see the Bears lose. Occasionally you have to admit that the Bears won the game, right? If the score is Chicago 21, Green Bay 10, very few of us are going to argue that Green Bay won the game. And why is that? It's because you know the rules. You've watched enough football that you understand how the game works. Every now and then you might claim that the ref made a bad call. Every now and then you might claim that the other team cheated. But we can come to the same conclusion, no matter if we're rooting for Chicago or Green Bay, that one team won and the other team lost. I think this is an apt way of looking at debate in the modern political sphere, right? And you often see debate being compared to maybe a boxing match, which is another sport that is maybe hard to follow at first. If you don't know the rules of boxing, and there isn't a total knockout punch, it might be difficult for you to say who won, and you might need to defer to the judges. But if you know the rules of boxing, you can watch the match closely, and you can say, candidate A won that boxing match. Candidate B did not land the punches. So, tonight, I can talk about a lot of things. I'm going to focus on three. One, I'm going to ask how we got here. Do a brief history of political debate to understand why and how it's taken the form that it's taken in 2016. From there, I'm going to look at the maneuvers, the tactics that our debaters are currently using. And I'm going to look at our two major party candidates for president and our two major Senate candidates for the state of Wisconsin, who are debating in the coming week. We'll look at a couple examples and try and track how there are new tactics in this new mass media age that lead to debate success, so that we, in the third movement, can start critically analyzing these debates and come to more conclusive arguments that cross party lines, that cross from the home environment to the bar environment to the workplace, where we can actually start to say, no, conclusively, this candidate won this debate. Afterwards, we'll have a conversation, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So, where does debate come from? Why do we do it? In the Western tradition, we go all the way back to the Greeks, right? In ancient Greece, in the city-state of Athens, we developed the idea of rule by the people, democracy, where the decisions were made not just by elected leaders, but by the people who would get together in a certain place and hear out arguments and vote on decisions. This group of people in ancient Greece was called the Ekklesia, and the Ekklesia would hear out debates. And this is the model on which Americans fashioned their own democracy. And so when we think of debate and political debate in its purest form in American history, we often think of things like the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, right? But the 1858 debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas look very different from what you just saw this past week, right? In the Lincoln-Douglas debates, the debaters would get up and speak for 1 full hour, laying out a nuanced, detailed explanation of their position with evidence and reason, a sound argument in favor of policy, right? And then their opponent would get up and speak for a full hour. And then the first speaker would be able to respond for a half an hour. It's a long policy debate using all of these good debate terms like ethos, pathos, and logos, our credibility, our use of emotion, our use of logic and reason. But that's not the way debates work today. Now, some of us think that political debates have always decided the presidency. That's not entirely true. In fact, it was another 100 years before there was officially another presidential debate between the two major parties. 100 years after the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which was actually for the Senate, one of the most famous presidential debates of all time took to the airwaves. John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon debated on live television. And we learned a lot about debate when it took to the airwaves. No longer were the debaters engaging an immediate audience or traveling across the country selling their ideas. Now, two debaters could reach the entire nation at the same time. What did we learn? The media changes the message. Debate was going to take a different form in a television era. So those who listened to the debate on radio came to the conclusion largely that Richard Nixon won the debate, but those who watched television decided conclusively that Kennedy won. And why? Look at the guy. He's dreaming. It's visual. All of a sudden, with mass media, visual began to matter. The way that the media forms the way that we as an audience understand the arguments before us is only more influential in the current age, when we have things like the internet, where people have maybe 7, 8, 9 different browser windows open while watching the debate, and maybe you're live tweeting it, and maybe you're posting the next day, and maybe the candidates themselves are live tweeting it, and maybe they're posting the next day and responding, and maybe telling you during the middle of the debate that you should go to their website and check their fact checker. We have a new form of debate, and I think this changes the rules. The debater who's going to win a debate in 2016 is the debater who can harness the media, who can get the media to tell the stories that they want to tell. In 2016, we have very short attention spans, right? We like our news very quickly. We like to be entertained. We like to do multiple things at one time. And so I would argue in 2016, there are a few new debate tactics at play. One, we look for the quips and the zingers in a mass media age. It's no longer about an hour-long policy debate. You wake up the morning after a debate, and what are the headlines? The quips and the zingers, the witty retorts, the 4 to 10 word phrases that are easily quotable, and then you can move on and get on with your day. These are more important in a mass media era where we have many, many different media vying for our attention. 2, the visual element is still very, very important. 3, on the other side of the quips and the zingers, we have spin and smear. Changing a story to fit your own message, changing it to fit your own perspective, and using that smear to really insult your opponent. Try and get your opponent to have a gaffe or a blunder, because that's the other big headline the day after a major political debate. Can you believe that X candidate said something so ridiculous? They put their foot in their mouth. They looked like a fool. That can decide a debate in the modern era, because we are so tuned into the negative, the celebrity, the quick, the snappy. And ultimately, it's easier to win a debate by making your opponent look bad in 10 seconds of airtime than it is to win a debate by talking about your policies for 30 minutes. So we see this shift to the quick, the snappy, the negative. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sure, if you yearn for the days of Aristotle and Abraham Lincoln, you're going to turn your nose at tactics like these. But really, these are just debaters meeting the aesthetic of the current culture. This is played out in the debates of the modern era, right? So if a candidate checks a watch impatiently throughout the debate, like George Bush did, it gives off the air of impatience, of boredom. George Bush did not win that election. If a candidate like Ronald Reagan can shake his head confidently at Jimmy Carter and say, there you go again, or to Walter Mondale and insist that he's not going to let age become an issue because his opponent is young and unexperienced, right? A good zinger, a good quip like that can give a candidate a foot up. And when we look at the last major election cycle between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, it was a battle of quips and zingers, of binders full of women and navies versus cavalry charges. So, with the second part of our talk today, I want to look at some of these tactics in the debates today. I'm going to look at the debate between Donald J. Trump and Hillary Clinton from a week or so ago. And then I also want to look at the debate from 6 years ago as a preview for what we're going to see between Ron Johnson and Russ Feingold. One thing we can look for in the modern debates is the visual. This is not difficult, so I'm not going to dwell on it for very long. I think we're all very tuned into the visual, and we have been since the 1950s. But you can look at the current debates and say, clothing choices matter. A bright red dress draws the eye. Even if you didn't want to look at Hillary Clinton, you kind of had to. It's our instinct to look at something like that. That was a strategic choice that maybe would not have occurred to Aristotle or Abraham Lincoln, but it was a savvy choice for the Clinton campaign. In the same way that Donald Trump's makeup was toned down, and the fact that he wore a blue tie rather than a red tie or a pink tie made him seem less divisive, less aligned with the Republican Party that has branded itself as a red party. So the visual matters. Fallacies matter. Fallacies are not lies. Fallacies are logic that doesn't quite add up. And this is something we've been looking at in debates for a long time. We look at ad populum fallacies, arguments that because something's popular, it's right. If all your friends jumped off of a bridge, you should do it too, right? That's an ad populum fallacy. We talk about red herrings, random information that is in no way related to the conversation at hand. We talk about slippery slope fallacies, where you imply that if you vote for my opponent, they will enact a certain form of legislation which will lead to widespread unemployment, which will lead to despair, which will lead to violence in the streets, which will make America weak, which will lead to nuclear war if you give a mouse a cookie, right? These are important. When I looked at the debates from these last weeks, I found 4 other things that I'd like to call your attention to. So we talk about the visual a lot, and we talk about fallacies a lot, but I want to give you a few more tools to work with, and I'm going to show you some clips to help us do that. The first tool is something that you're probably already aware of, but I want to give you a term so that you can call it out when you see it. Sloganeering is a tactic used increasingly in this mass media, internet media, social media age. When we have very short, buzzworthy phrases, a slogan can be very powerful. And so in the past debate, this past week, we saw both candidates dropping in quippy, quotable phrases that maybe show up in their campaign commercials as well. For instance, Hillary Clinton commented on Donald Trump's tax plan.
And the kind of plan that Donald has put forth would be trickle-down economics all over again. In fact, it would be the most extreme version, the biggest tax cuts for the top % of the people in this country than we've ever had. I call it trumped up trickle down, because that's exactly what it would be. That is not how we grow the economy.
Trumped up trickle down, right? I've seen some of the comedy shows making fun of the quote-unquote spontaneity of this response. This was pre-calculated, but man, you can slap that on a bumper sticker. You can put that on your Facebook page. And it's not just Clinton doing it. When asked about the ongoing controversies surrounding police use of force, this was Donald Trump's response.
Well, first of all, Secretary Clinton doesn't want to use a couple of words, and that's law and order. And we need law and order. If we don't have it, we're not going to have a country.
Is anybody opposed to law and order? No. But what Trump did is he took a really simple, quotable phrase and winnowed the entire issue into a slogan. And it goes both ways. Clinton uses a phrase she's been using since January.
So a man who can be provoked by a tweet should not have his fingers anywhere near the nuclear codes, as far as I think anyone with any sense about this should be concerned.
A man who can be provoked by a tweet has been retweeted millions of times. And of course,
I want to make America great again.
Perhaps the most influential presidential slogan of the current era, right? Sloganeering is a good tactic in the modern era where we have this short attention span and everything is immediately filtered through the internet. So we need to be aware of it and how the candidates are strategically putting slogans into their debate responses. Something else we can look at is evasion. And we're all aware of politicians who do this, who are asked a question point blank and somehow talk for 2 minutes without ever addressing the question. We saw plenty of that 2 nights ago, right? A good word for this is obfuscation. That's the big $20 word. Basically means talking in such a complex, circuitous way that the moderator isn't going to ask you any other questions. Obfuscation. And you know what? The presidential debate, I think, started off with this. Lester Holt turned to Hillary Clinton.
Beginning with you, Secretary Clinton, why are you a better choice than your opponent to create the kinds of jobs that will put more money into the pockets of American workers?
Well, thank you, Lester, and thanks to Hofstra for hosting us. The central question in this election is really what kind of country we want to be and what kind of future we'll build together. Today is my granddaughter's 2nd birthday, so I think about this a lot.
So my jaw hit the floor. I tuned into the debates, and she's asked point blank about what makes you best for jobs, and within 20 seconds, well, it's my granddaughter's what? Now, there's a reason she wants to talk about that, right? But that's not what she was asked. She's found a way to steer the conversation to something that she does want to talk about. And again, it goes both ways. So let's see what happens when Donald Trump is asked about a quote that he gave to the press that is documented.
Earlier this month, you said she doesn't have, quote, a presidential look. She's standing here right now. What did you mean by that?
She doesn't have the look. She doesn't have the stamina. I said she doesn't have the stamina. And I don't believe she does have the stamina.
He was asked about his quote about saying something about her look, and boom, he's able to turn the conversation to something he does want to talk about, stamina. This, again, maybe not the most pure rhetorical tactic, But it's really useful in this age where it's all about the quips and all about making your opponent look bad. Speaking of which, when you are so concerned with promoting your public image, there's a fine balance between boasting about your own accomplishments and attacking your opponent. So I want to shift and look at the Feingold-Johnson debates from 6 years ago. In the opening statements of the Feingold-Johnson debates, you can see Russ Feingold very clearly boast of his own merits and then transition to attacking his opponent.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks to the whole greater Wausau community for your leadership in making this debate possible. I, of course, grew up in this state, lived here all my life, and I've been instilled in the idea of Wisconsin independence, political independence in particular. And that's had a big impact on the way I've done this job. Some people say I'm the most independent member of the Senate. It's the reason that I voted against that TARP deal, that Wall Street bailout. It's the reason that I voted against all those unfair trade agreements that sent tens of thousands of Wisconsin jobs overseas. It's even the reason, as you know here in Marathon County, that I voted against that No Child Left Behind bill, which forces teachers to teach to the test and takes away local control of education. But I go to all 72 counties every year and hear what people's priorities are. And you all know what the priorities are. It's jobs and cutting federal spending. I have offered specific plans on jobs and federal spending, a jobs tax credit, and a 41-point plan to cut $500 billion out of the federal budget. My opponent has chosen in 6 months of campaigning to do nothing of the kind. He hasn't offered a jobs plan. He hasn't offered a specific plan to cut federal spending. But I'm still hoping we can have a discussion about it tonight. Thanks so much.
When you watch a debate, you can keep an eye on this. When a candidate switches from boasting about their own accomplishments and their own merits to the demerits of their opponent. Now, an interesting thing I noticed when I watched the debates from 6 years ago between Russ Feingold and Ron Johnson is that Feingold, as the incumbent, often opened with his own merits and then shifted to the demerits. But Ron Johnson, as the challenger, opened with an attack and then shifted to his own merits. So watch what Johnson does.
I'd like to thank the University of Wisconsin Marathon County and tonight's viewers. Wisconsin voters do have a very clear choice this election. Senator Feingold cast a deciding vote for both the failed stimulus package and the health care bill. He's also voted for the last 3 budgets that have increased our national debt by over $3 trillion. We simply can't afford these failed policies any longer. I offer a different direction. I've been building a business for 31 years, producing products, exporting products, creating real jobs. I'd like to use that lifetime experience to help get our economy growing again so we can start creating jobs and actually start addressing our national spending and debt issue. The idea and promise of America is something incredibly precious. America is exceptional, and it is our job to make sure that it not only survives for future generations, but that it thrives. That's why I decided to run for the U.S. Senate. That's why I'm asking for your vote. Thank you, and good night.
I think this is an interesting contrast, right? Johnson very much starts out on the attack, laying out all the reasons why his opponent doesn't deserve your vote, and then turns into a very positive upswing. Now, who won that election? The challenger. It'll be interesting to see what happens in a week, because it's harder to continue that negative attack first and then a positive follow-up if you're already the person in power. So I'm going to be watching attentively to see, are they going to lead in the same way that they did 6 years ago, or is it going to flip? Who opens with an attack and follows up with a boast? Who opens up with a boast and follows with an attack? It all does come down to making your opponent look bad. Again, it's easier to win a debate by having your opponent look bad in 10 seconds than it is to make yourself look good in 30. And so the one tactic that I've seen across the board in this current cycle is asserting qualities of your opponent, telling them what they believe, or speaking for them. And all 4 of our candidates do things like that. Listen to Russ Feingold, for instance, talking about Ron Johnson.
And Senator Feingold, you have 60 seconds.
As I said at the outset, the difference between us would be whether we proposed any solutions to problems. I've talked specifically about how I would try to solve the problem of jobs and specifically how we deal with the issue of deficits. Mr. Johnson has offered none of that. And ask yourself, between the 2 of us, who's on your side? Who voted to control the insurance industry and not let them be in charge when it comes to health care? And who voted against those trade agreements that sent these jobs overseas? I voted against them. He thinks they're a great idea. He thinks they're good for Wisconsin. Well, what's good for Wisconsin is protecting jobs and protecting Wisconsin values. And if you give me the chance, I'd like to continue to work on that.
So this time it was very subtle, but did you hear it? He thinks they're a good idea. He thinks they're good for Wisconsin. Now, is that what Johnson actually thinks? I don't know. We don't hear from Johnson. Feingold speaks for Johnson's belief, but it gets more explicit than that. Johnson does the same thing back, speaking for what Feingold believes.
Barney Frank said as much. He said this is the first step along this path to a single payer. And quite honestly, Senator Feingold, that's exactly what Senator Feingold wants. He wants a single payer government solution.
That's exactly what he wants. Is that what Feingold wants? Or is that what Johnson is telling us as audience that Feingold wants? A week ago, between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, we saw the same thing over and over and over again. So let's look at how they asserted things about what their opponents believed.
I think this election really is about governing philosophy. I mean, I do believe in a small, limited government, in less government control in our lives, less spending, less taxes. And I think Senator Feingold's record has been pretty clear. He wants government control over lives. He wanted a single-payer, government-run healthcare system. He has voted for higher taxes 278 times. He likes higher spending.
Putting words in his mouth. This can really aggravate your opponent. Imagine if this happened to you. If I told you what you believed, if I told you who you were voting for and why you were voting for them, right? That happened.
So you've got to ask yourself, why won't he release his tax returns? And I think there may be a couple of reasons. First, maybe he's not as rich as he says he is. Second, maybe he's not as charitable as he claims to be. Third, we don't know all of his business dealings, but we have been told through investigative reporting that he owes about $650 million to Wall Street and foreign banks. Or maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes, because the only years that anybody's ever seen were a couple of years when he had to turn them over to state authorities when he was trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So if he's paid zero, that means zero for troops, zero for vets, zero for schools or health. And I think probably he's not all that enthusiastic about having the rest of our country see what the real reasons are, because it must be something really important, even terrible, that he's trying to hide.
That's a long portion in which Hillary Clinton just puts out all these hypotheticals about what must he really be thinking. And you can see he does not like it. She gets under his skin. She's opening opportunity for a potential blunder or gaffe. Trump hits back, asserting things that not only Clinton believes, but that she will do if elected to office.
You are going to approve one of the biggest tax increases in history. You are going to drive business out. Your regulations are a disaster, and you're going to increase regulations all over the place. And by the way, my tax cut is the biggest since Ronald Reagan. I'm very proud of it. It will create tremendous numbers of new jobs. But regulations, you are going to regulate these businesses out of existence.
You know that if you did win, this is what you would do. That's a powerful assertion. And it's a useful debate tactic in 2016, when it's all about public image, when it's all about making your opponent look a certain way, right? So, I'm going to skip ahead here because I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do we do with all of that? Here are a couple terms, a couple aspects of modern debate that you can look at. What should we do? Throw our hands up in disgust and say, debate doesn't serve any purpose anymore. No, 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 no. Debate serves a purpose. But we need to think of what purpose that is. It's not the same purpose of the Nixon-Kennedy debates or the Lincoln-Douglas debates, where you're trying to persuade a small group of people. Why do we have these debates in the first place? Well, it's not for the candidates' benefit. It's not like they would get together in a giant hall, lock the doors in a giant empty room, and just argue with one another for their own pleasure. In the same way that boxers wouldn't rent out an arena and just have a fight for the heck of it. No, it's for you. And this is something that we seem to be forgetting. It's easy to forget in a mass media age that you, thousands of miles away, on the other side of a screen, passively sitting in your pajamas, eating cold pizza, are a crucial part of this whole process. It's easy to remember that when you're in the room with the candidates. But we seem to have forgotten the crucial role of the audience. The reason we have a debate is for the benefit of the audience, for the benefit of you, the modern day Ekklesia. So, to wrap up my comments for the evening, I have a charge for all of you. Now that we've started a conversation, I've given you a couple little tools to help you more critically look at these debates. I think we need to wake ourselves up and push our conversations in new directions. So, next week, when you watch Senator Johnson and Russ Feingold go toe-to-toe 6 years later, and when you see Trump and Clinton debate again in the coming weeks, I want you to think more critically about the tactics that they're using. Be engaged. Look at how they are using these ideas. The New York Times last week published an article on the debates, criticizing them, and urging people to get more involved. It's very easy to be passive when you're watching debates on a computer screen or on a television screen or 3 days after they happen, but it doesn't mean that you're not the crucial part of this process. So respond. Get other people talking. And then when you do, leave the coffee table in your family room and go to the bar and go to the workplace and have all these different people having different perspectives on who won the debate, you can introduce some of these new tactics to really help understand. We may disagree on issues or policies or who we're ultimately going to vote for, but we can understand what's actually happening at the debate. I thank you for letting me share these ideas, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you think and having a nice discussion. Thank you.